Good morning, everybody. It's great to hear those remarks. Good to reflect on a lot of work and a lot over time and a lot of change. Well, I'm Mark Muro, Senior Fellow at Brookings, and it's my pleasure to moderate what I think is going to be a really fascinating panel today. Our topic is a truth that began to emerge, I think, in Amy's remarks, that to go global turns out to mean you, in fact, have to go local and build local competitiveness. I think for a long time, the global initiative has, the standard view has been that it is about looking outward, looking abroad, looking elsewhere, and it was a sort of technical matter of connecting outwards. Over time, though, I think the practical work in these cities and in this work has brought about a recognition that being global is hugely about having competitive traded sectors, which is fundamentally about assembling the building blocks of local competitiveness. It's a local matter to be global. In a word, then, I think going global turns out to entail investing in local things, technology, technical skills, strong initiatives, collaborative networks. These are the growth drivers. Cities have to invest in those to thrive in the global economy. I think that's become more and more clear over the 5 years of this project. So that brings us to our panel. The next hour, we're going to focus on the importance of committing to a serious homegrown competitiveness strategy as a prerequisite for strong global positioning. This is not to ignore the importance of the national platform, and I think people like Rob Atkinson have been brilliant in clarifying those elements. But there's also this subnational element and the activities and decisive investments that have to occur, not just at the state level, but in cities. And that's what I think this sort of reunion, as it were, is here to talk about. So we're going to highlight some metro regions that have placed big bets on their futures through investments in bold, platform-changing initiatives of sizable scale that I think can sometimes confound the usual view, for instance, that research investments are inherently a national matter. I think more and more, some of these things are devolving downwards, at least as a complement. And these efforts we're going to talk about are not small ball. So I'd like to introduce our panel today, which includes one polymath who's an expert on all aspects of what matters in building an advanced, globally competitive economy. And then 3 regional leaders who are deeply involved, I think, in building local competitiveness through pretty extraordinary local initiatives. There's a lot of local initiatives in the room here. These, I think, clarify some of the elements and needed outlines, but then they ramp it up. These are large-scale initiatives that I think allow us to think about what matters. So I'll start by introducing the polymath at the far end, who is Rob Atkinson, the founder and president of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, which is truly one of the most important thinkers I know about innovation, growth, and competitiveness. And I'll just say, if you see anything written by Rob, like his book, Innovation Economics, read it. Next to
is more important than reading it. I don't really care if you read it.
That's excellent.
Yeah. Next to Rob sits David Johnson. David's the president and CEO of the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, as well as the president of its BioCrossroads Life Sciences Initiative. Each of these intermediaries is an extraordinary driver of regional competitiveness, but I'll let David tell the story in a few minutes. And next to David sits Gilles Bloch, who is a distinguished French research scientist and administrator who created and was the first director of the nation's National Research Agency. Subsequently, he served as the director of the Life Sciences Division of the CEA, a key French tech research entity, and last year became the first president of the University of Paris-Saclay, which we're going to explore a little this morning. And as you will hear, that initiative is an extraordinary bid to consolidate many of France's most potent research institutions under one common brand and co-locate them in one geographic cluster about 45 minutes outside Paris. And finally, next to me is Susan Pretulik, the Vice President of Economic Development and Workforce Competitiveness at the South Carolina Technical College. Susan oversees not one, but two nationally recognized models of no-nonsense, industry-oriented skills training, Ready SC, and Apprenticeship Carolina, the latter of which I do want us to focus on as we go on here. So let me launch the conversation. I think I'd like to tee up some questions myself along the way here, and then we'll open this up into an increasingly free discussion and then open it out to you for questions in the audience. I trust we will provoke you, maybe inspire you. So to start with, I do want to ask, though, Rob Atkinson in some ways to frame what is at stake here and launch things by suggesting what a competitive strategy might be in 2016, 2017. Recently, you wrote an op-ed arguing that leaders should push back against economic pessimism, especially the concern that productivity is flagging in our country, but committing to a focused productivity strategy, which really comes down to, I think, a general competitiveness strategy in certain ways. Can you elaborate? What is a competitiveness strategy in your view? What are the key outlines, and what's the purpose?
Sure. Well, thank you, Mark. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Amy. I've really enjoyed the relationship ITIF has had with Brookings over the years. We've worked on a number of, I think, really important projects, National Innovation Foundation, manufacturing universities, which actually may get turned into law at the end of the year, which is great, with Senator Chris Coons. So I think one of the most important factors here that I just see this kind of confusion and conflation going on really all around the world is that innovation, productivity, and competitiveness are three distinct things. They're like a Venn diagram overlap. If you want to go deeper in that, you can read a report we wrote called Innovation, Productivity, Competitiveness, Clearing Up the Confusion. So now that I've cleared that up for you, if none of your cities were trading anywhere, if you were all autarkic and you just had your own car plant and your own software companies, no trade, you wouldn't care about competitiveness. You'd care about productivity because you want to have more output for all the workers, and you'd care about innovation because you want new things, new drugs, better cars, all that kind of good stuff. But you do trade, and that's the key component here of competitiveness. It's how well you can trade with the rest of the world and do it on essentially what economists call good terms of trade. In other words, you want to be able to be trading high value added products and services so that you can afford more imports. That's, why do you trade, by the way? You trade because your citizens want to buy cars from Japan and they want to buy movies from some other place, and so you have to be able to have money to send to those people. So then you get that by sending your own products and services out. So that's really why you want to do that. And I think what's interesting is how that dynamic has changed over the last, say, 75 years. Really, pre-World War II, most cities were trading largely within their big region, the South within the South, the Northeast within the Northeast. After World War II, the interstate highway system and telephony and jets, we built a national market, very disruptive to a lot of cities as they lost competitive advantage, great for some cities. And then clearly in the last 30 years, we built this global market, which keeps going through new iterations. And that's added a whole new set of competitive challenges. And I think one of the things that cities perhaps don't fully understand is when they think of traded sectors historically, or you sort of learn that that's manufacturing principally. We make this and we move it around. But I think the biggest dynamic now is that technology is enabling more and more services to be traded. We see that when we buy on our phone on Amazon. I mean, we don't go to the local retailer as much anymore. We see it on things like travel services with Expedia. But even where things have to be done locally, a bigger share of that value added is now traded. So for example, when you used to take a taxi in DC, all of that money stayed in DC. Went to the cab drivers and it went to the cab companies. And now, I don't know, 40% of it goes to Palo Alto or Silicon Valley where Uber is. Some of it stays with the driver. Same thing with Airbnb. So more and more of the economies of cities and metros are going to be traded with regard to services, which means you have to think about that strategy. And then just the last point I'll make on that is, I think it's really hard to predict where our technology is going and the impact on regions or geographies. But I think probably where things are going is that services are going to be more and more traded, and goods are actually going to be more and more localized. And I say that because if you look at what's happening in smart manufacturing, a lot of those technologies are enabling shorter supply chains, enabling advantages for cities that are high cost. And historically, you were losing out on that because you were in mass production, commodity-based, cost-based things with long supply chains. But things like 3D printing and computer-aided design and flexible production, industrial internet, all of these things I think could be leading to a kind of reconcentration of manufacturing, which has, I think, important implications. And then the last point, Mark, I really completely agree with the notion of going local, but I guess I would call it maybe going nocal, national and local. Because I just don't think, if we don't have the right national competitive policies and strategies, it's a lot harder for you all to do your work. I hate to use that term, but I think it's right in this case. A rising tide lifts the boats that have their own strategies. If you don't have a bad strategy, your boat's going to be sinking. But if the tide is rising, so if the federal government puts in place better policies, which frankly we hit and miss here. We don't invest that much in skill development. We don't do apprenticeship programs. We have put in place the National Network of Manufacturing Innovation. That's been ensconced in the law, but hopefully the next administration will support it. So the feds have to be partners. They have to do their role. If they don't do that, it's a lot harder for what you all are trying to do.
We're at a period in time where you have to speak up and remind us about the federal relevance. So let's, Gilles, having heard Rob's call for the embrace of competitiveness strategies, I think he's extending it from nations into states, and clearly, as we're saying, into cities. I wonder if you could discuss the ways the formation of the University of Paris-Saclay reflects such a strategy. I mean, clearly it's an administrative maneuver to, I think, rationalize delivery of and focus of intellectual and science-based activity, but it seems like it's also more. Can you give us first maybe describe the initiative, and then maybe give us a sense of what the goal is here in terms of regional competitiveness?
Okay, thank you. You might know that Paris, I have one slide which should appear on the screen, belongs to these global giants that Emilio introduced. And it's a huge territory. And 10 years ago, a couple of people, Christian Blanc, who was a politician especially, had a vision of structuring the Paris area with several clusters, knowledge and innovation clusters. And Paris-Saclay was already one of these. Then there was a second initiative from the government called Initiative d'Excellence, Excellence Initiatives, a little bit like what happened in Germany also in the same period. And so the vision was to create from the existing higher education and research institutions located in this southwest Paris area, a new university which could compete with the best world-class universities. You have many in the US, there are many in UK, but in France, the first university is ranked below the 40th and the 50th position, and we believe that's not enough to foster a strong economic cluster. So the story started a long time ago, but it really accelerated 5 years ago with a national competition for mega grants, and Paris-Saclay was successful. And we got first a huge investment from the government to move existing grandes écoles to the core campus, which is now under construction. Just to give you an idea, Paris-Saclay involves 18 existing institutions, 9 so-called grandes écoles, 2 universities, 7 research organizations, and we will move 6 of these institutions from the closer Paris suburb to the central campus. So it's a huge transformation. We've got from the government funding of 5 billion euros to build the new campus, to move these grandes écoles. We will have a new metro line going through the campus within 5 to 6 years. And so overall, we represent about 15% of the French R&D already. And hopefully, this will increase in the next few years. So the goal is really to be more attractive, more visible, more connected to the economic tissue. And the story started 4 years ago, and I can give you just a few achievements. We completely reshuffled the PhD programs at the scale of all these institutions. We deliver currently 1,500 PhD per year, which is a large scale. We also completely reshuffled the master degrees at the scale of all the institutions. We deliver currently 5,000 master degrees every year. And we deliver about 5,000 engineering. It's not really the right translation. Diplôme d'ingénieur, these are 5 years after high school degrees in France. And this is now completely integrated among all the institutions. And the goal is really to be more attractive, more efficient, and to be in the near future ranked among the 20 to 30 best academic institutions in the world. So a last figure, just so that you have in mind the size of the initiative. We welcome overall 70,000 students. So this is a bigger university. And the initiative on the central campus, it's on the map somewhere between Palaiseau and Saclay. I don't know if you can read it, but you will have access to this slide on your website. We are currently building 1.7 million square meters of housing, academic building, buildings for companies. So this is a whole cluster which will be structured in this southwest region.
So this is more than simply an institutional reorganization or efficiency bid. It sounds like full-blown localization of a range of scientific and tech transfer activities into a confined place. Is that an important part of this?
Actually, there are two major transformations. First, this real estate transformation with a core campus which is under construction, and then the progressive integration of the existing institution within a single world-class university. And both processes will take another 10 years, but they are already quite visible because first, I'm very grateful that you invited us. That you invited us, and because I believe that we are becoming quite visible. Second, we get many contacts with large companies. There are already many companies in this area like Safran, like General Electric, like Danone, EDF, etc. And almost every week we have one large company exploring the possibility to have a new location in this area. So I believe that this dual initiative with the construction of the central campus and the construction of a new institution is really transforming the landscape.
So it's a national, state, local effort to create a platform for both science-based development and foreign direct investment, it sounds like, as well. But, well, let's, David, and I think this begins to point to some of the things you're engaged in Indiana. You've been in the middle of the creation in Indianapolis of some of the most impressive regional intermediary organizations for driving competitiveness that I know of. I'm thinking of BioCrossroads, obviously, in the life sciences sector, but the broader kind of holding company of industry verticals that is Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. Can you describe why and how and what those are, why and how your region embraced the idea of really creating new intermediaries? It seems like the region at a certain point decided to become more intentional about developing an enviable array of large life sciences legacy companies. But give us a sense of the trajectory here. It seems like, 20 years ago, there's some very deep thinking about where the region was going. Why don't you explore that a little bit?
Well, Mark, thank you very much. It's great to be here today. Amy, thank you for including us in this conference. I want to give a shout out to Al Smith, who is a member of our CICP board. In fact, JPMorgan Chase is a founding member of CICP in the strategy that I'll talk about in just a moment here. A lot of vision for where the region and city should be going. Amy, I really like your structure that you just went through, the different types of global cities. We always appreciate a shout out, so I'm delighted that you singled us out. And I like the category American middleweight. That actually is a title I think we should accept and be proud of. Indianapolis, in a sense, is a city that has always tried to box above its weight. We are not a city that has ever experienced a near-death experience from the standpoint of losing, a huge major employer or having any kind of major financial catastrophe. It's the business center, the capital, and increasingly the intellectual capital of the state as well, with two really strong research universities there and close by in a pretty compact geography. And in a way, our history has been boxing above our weight in more traditional forms of economic development, particularly in the 80s and the 90s, when we decided that the way to do that was through sports and sports tourism. And we did some pretty ambitious and outrageous things. We built a football stadium before we had a team, and then we went to Baltimore and found one in the Colts. We then learned that the Pan American Games, which were supposed to be in Cuba, the Havana could not put them on that year. And so a group of our citizens went down to Havana and negotiated to have the Pan American Games in Indianapolis. That was a really hard one to explain to people, but it really worked. It was an awesome event. We then went out and recruited the National Rowing Association to come to have its headquarters in Indianapolis, even though Indianapolis is the largest city in the world that's not on a navigable body of water. So it was a really good strategy. And then that was capped off in the mid-90s with a delegation, again, of other public-spirited citizens and corporate leaders who went to Kansas City and convinced the NCAA to make its permanent home and headquarters in Indianapolis instead of in Overland Park, Kansas. Which is a wonderful thing. It's brought Final Four events, university presidents, all kinds of activity to the city. And those were great programs, and they all involved the same chemistry that we use today, which is very, very, very strong corporate leadership, very engaged philanthropic leadership, increasing focus on university leadership and the assets, the enormous assets that, particularly in our part of the country, research universities represent. They're some of the biggest assets we have. And all of that group really working very, very, very closely together to try to pursue a very, as you say, intentional strategy. The problem with that as a strategy, really, there are two problems with it. One is we kind of did it. You know, we hit a point where it was like, okay, what do you do next after the NCAA comes? But secondly, it was not a strategy that dealt with the other issue that American middleweights, I would submit, really have in abundance, and that is, you are absolutely right that we are part of the global economy. It is very difficult for people in cities like ours sometimes to recognize that, because we still see ourselves very much as kind of the giant among midgets, or the tallest place in the region, but not necessarily connected to a global economy. So the fact that we are, in the state of Indiana, the most manufacturing intensive state in the U.S., the fact that Rolls-Royce and Roche Diagnostics have all of their main facilities headquartered in central Indiana, production and R&D, the fact that we are the second largest exporter of life sciences products anywhere in the United States other than California, manufactured goods. We are clearly part of the global game, and yet we really weren't thinking about it that way. And that's how the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, which I'm assuming you probably have some really ugly, messy slide of this thing that's up there somewhere, was brought into being, again, by a very intentional strategy by corporate leaders, university leaders, and philanthropic heads in around 2000, 2001. It was designed to be a very exclusive club, and this was important for a reason. It was CEOs and board chairs only, and the reason for that was that our CEOs and board chairs and university presidents are keenly aware of the global nature of the challenges we face in the struggle for investment, in the struggle increasingly for talent, and in the struggle just to keep the facilities and the operations they have rooted in a place like Indianapolis instead of somewhere else. And CICP was initially brought together around 2000, as I mentioned, to primarily think about advocating with policymakers, both at state and local government. It was a private organization, so government was not represented on the board, but it was to be interfacing with that. Increasingly, what we decided was that what was needed were a series of very intentional, stakeholder-driven investment strategies in the productive sectors that form the strength of what we do. And the wonderful work you folks have done in advanced industries, you list 50 advanced industries that are sort of the future of everything. We've got 45 of them in abundance. But we had not any organized strategy for really looking at that. And so we picked a deep vertical strategy, a deliberate siloing strategy, by the way, in that, to really try to drive talent, investment, and different kinds of activities and projects to each of those verticals that would advance them. So for our BioCrossroads initiative, which I helped to form in 2003, the missing piece there was venture capital. So we went out and formed 4 or 5 venture capital funds over the period of time. Not an easy thing to do, but it's been a productive thing. With our energy sector, we needed a place where a number of our companies could form a battery research facility. So down at Crane, they established the Battery Innovation Center. And again, all of the stakeholders involved in that were investing in that technology. For our advanced manufacturing sector, the challenge is talent. The challenge is training high school students and associate's degree students to have the right kind of preparation. And so our Connexus initiative, again, in advanced manufacturing, really focused on developing a tremendous high school and associate's degree curriculum, a retail product that is now in high schools and institutions across the state. That's really how BioCrossroads, or how the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership has operated. Sitting on top of it is the CICP Foundation, which again channels a lot of the philanthropy, again, including thanks to our friends at JPMorgan Chase, funding from the JPMorgan Chase Foundation, Lilly Endowment, a number of others who work with us. And we end up being able then to have these complex sector initiatives, you see them on that slide, all of which are focused on projects, investments, and differential strategies, increasingly focused on common challenges like talent, placemaking, and other things that go across all of those advanced industries. And I think maybe we'll talk a little bit more, perhaps in another time, about the biggest one of those, which is the Biosciences Research Institute.
Let's do that. One quick follow-up. Sounds like things were going pretty well in Indianapolis, around 2000. A series of these other wins, construction of stadium for a non-existent football team and so on.
Right.
But what was the urgency? Was there a sense of seeing where the game was going and feeling that the region was not well positioned? Because this is obviously a very aggressive set of activities. I'm interested in what motivated, what was the problem statement?
It's a good question, and I think you can argue that sometimes people really benefit from a crisis or having your back up against a wall.
Which you had not had.
Did not.
Yeah.
But what we did have were some very, very thoughtful leaders at that time. And as a quick example for you, so Eli Lilly and Company lost the patent on Prozac in 2001, 2 years ahead of when it was supposed to expire. No major pharmaceutical company had ever survived the loss of a major patent like that and stayed independent. And Lilly is all in on being an Indiana-based company. It's global, but it's all in on being there. They immediately knew that they had a need to go out and get a lot of new talented people to come to work in Indianapolis to help generate that next set of opportunities and that next big pipeline, which, by the way, they did and continue to do. They couldn't do that alone. They couldn't do that without a more intentional strategy that, among the other things, developed the data to say, hey, this is a life sciences center. I mean, this is actually an enormous life sciences economy, which needs attention, branding, and thought, but also is an attractive place to recruit talent. So there had to be a collaborative need where was bigger than one company to do.
And I think Rob Atkinson has written about, intra-industry dynamics and cycles. And it sounds like there wasn't a region-wide crisis, but a particular life cycle problem.
A series of things like that. Right. And then the other quick thing is very, very, very engaged strategic philanthropy. I cannot overemphasize that enough. We are blessed with Lilly Endowment, Richard M. Fairbanks Foundation, JPMorgan Chase Foundation, 4 or 5 others that from the beginning take the long view and again look at things much more globally and understood what we were about to be facing in the new century.
So thank you for this. Susan, I want to ask you about South Carolina's work in developing systems for delivering, extremely, in-demand skills for a growing advanced manufacturing sector. I think it's striking that the South Carolina Technical College System is how thoroughly it is embraced and how early it embraced not just an economic development mission, but an economic development mission focused on, global connectivity and I think foreign direct investments, especially in manufacturing area. How did this come into, did simply industry trends start to occur in South Carolina early, or were there other reasons that this launched early?
Well, good morning, y'all. And I bring greetings from the South Carolina Technical College System. Amy, Mark, thank you for having me today. I've had the opportunity to participate with the Brookings community on a number of occasions, and it's always a deep pleasure. And you're right, we've been at this for quite a while. You know how us Southerners, we Southerners, like our history, and so I need to take you back to kind of understand a little bit about where we are today and how we've leveraged our resources and our connectivity to be successful and competitive in a global marketplace. Back in the late 50s and early 60s, South Carolina was essentially an economy driven by agriculture and textiles. And at that point in time, there was a serious outmigration of South Carolinians to the industrial Northeast and Midwest to find jobs. Our founding fathers, the founding fathers of the system, Fritz Holling, Ed West, to name 2 of them, were dismayed by this. They felt it was their purpose and the reason for being the governor of the state to create an economy that could sustain the citizens of the state. And
so this was an early, globally connected, competitive crisis.
And I was thinking about that as we were going through our panel prep. I'm not even sure they were thinking globally at that point. I think they were just trying to figure out what companies they could get in South Carolina so their people wouldn't leave. So they had a vision for a training system. Actually, they called it a training program. And their thought was, if we could do a training program that would have people trained and ready to go, we could attract companies to South Carolina and grow our economy. That was version 1.0 of the South Carolina Technical College system. And what you're seeing there, which is our current structure, is not very different from what it was they envisioned. If you look at the bottom half of the circle, you will see essentially the mission of the 16 technical colleges. They are located strategically throughout the state. Every citizen and every company in our state is within 30 minutes of one of our campuses. And frankly, with the growth of the technical college system in South Carolina, most of our companies and citizens do much better than that. The 16 technical colleges are responsible for continuing education, upskilling, as well as credit programs to provide pipeline. It's important for you to know that promoting economic development is part of their local mission. And as well, they are tasked with supporting the economies of their local service area, as well as supporting the growth and economies of the state at large. The top half of the circle is the Division of Economic Development. And in the center of the screen, you'll see the granddaddy of the system. For 55 years, and we just had our 55th birthday, I think 2 weeks ago maybe. From the beginning, our mission has been to assist companies that are either moving to South Carolina for the first time or are expanding to recruit and to train their workforce. We've been doing that for a long time with virtually no change in the mission, although how we do it and who we do it for has evolved over the 55 years. In 2008, we also added to that division Apprenticeship Carolina, which I think we'll come back and talk about a little bit. I am very proud to say that is the fastest growing apprenticeship system in the United States. And some of the things that we have done in a partnership with the Department of Labor have been really thrilling to participate in. And then finally, the Enterprise Zone program, and I think the last time I saw you all, this wasn't this slide, and if you look down too long, someone will add something to your mission. And so in this case, they've added a retraining program to the work of our division to assist companies to remain globally competitive by providing funding for retraining processes. So that's the system. We've got kind of the statewide, and we've also got what I would call a SWAT team approach. In terms of Ready SC, since it's been around the longest, we really have had the opportunity to develop some deep, deep networks. And the first and most critical network that we've developed is with our companies. Many of you are aware we've been very fortunate. We've recruited companies like BMW, Boeing, Continental, Michelin, oh my gosh, GT Tire, and I'll forget somebody and then I'll hate myself for it, Bridgestone. Global giants that have decided to locate in South Carolina, and we're very, very pleased to have them as our corporate citizens. As well, we work with, in any given year, 100 or so companies that are 100 people or less. So we're very deeply connected to the community, the business community. And any of you that have worked through a business startup know that that's a crucible. And whoever you walk that journey with, you become really good friends with. And we feel that those friendships have been important to help us bring additional business to South Carolina. What's really interesting for my staff and myself is that often the teams on the ground who were skeptical about whether we could build a plane, whether we could assemble a car or a van, you know, they look back and say, you know, we have other business, we would like to be here. And what is it you think you could bring to help us as a business unit make this a competitive responsibility? The other thing that I will say is that we've had the test of time. In the case of Michelin, we've been in partnership with them for almost 40 years. And in any given year, we may be working on 4 or 5 individual projects. So it's a trust factor with our business communities and longevity in terms of relationships. I think the second thing that has helped us is that rather than being deeply seen as a workforce entity, although we are, I think we're very much seen as a partner in the economic development community. Bill Cronin may be out there somewhere, but our Department of Commerce sees Ready SC in particular as a reason for doing business in South Carolina. So we work very closely with prospects that are coming into the state as well as site consultants, which allows our network to grow. In addition to that, we're very connected with the local economic development communities and the local and regional economic development alliances. Once again, a network with many, many feelers. I think the other thing that we've been very fortunate with is that we have good connectivity with the governor and our General Assembly. And that's across administrations. I think the leaders in our state have seen us as a valuable resource for competitiveness. Ready SC and Apprenticeship Carolina are totally funded by state taxpayer dollars. And we have never failed to be funded at the rate that we've been asked. We've asked to be funded for, and we are the only agency in the state that if we need more money, we can go back and ask for it. So we've got networks there that allow us to promote the work we do and feel comfortable about our ability to do it. And finally, we've trained unduplicated, yes. Unduplicated. Well, you know, it's early. Yeah. About 288,000 South Carolinians. And those are citizens of our states, and we've helped them to find jobs, good jobs with competitive wage and benefit packages. We've trained them, we've upskilled their family, our community, and at the end of the day, we've got a solid base of people in our own state that support our competitiveness agenda. And so, you know, we're not, you said no nonsense, we're not sexy, we're not fancy, but we're here to get the job done, I guess.
I mean, it seems like a very clear recognition that skills is a way to build economic development, and that has a global implication. It would, you know, makes me, I want to connect that to some of the way, hear how Rob sees this. You know, what to you is the kind of ladder or the kind of, what is the ultimate goal of this kind of work to you appropriately, and then what are the kind of pathways or the key terms in achieving, you know, a competitiveness strategy? And you've written a lot about, you know, increasingly, I think, about productivity as the top line goal. Can you walk through how you see, you know, competitiveness, productivity, and then what are the elements under it? And you talked about them being separate in the past and kind of cohering more.
So again, I think there's still a lot of confusion. I mean, even Michael Porter at Harvard, who I have enormous respect for, he says that productivity is synonymous with competitiveness, and that's really not true. If you look at a country like South Korea, which I think when you look at your ranking on the difference between their traded productivity and the rest of their productivity, they're very high. And the reason is because they've got great globally traded firms, but abysmally domestic serving firms. I mean, they have the highest traded to non-traded productivity gap in the OECD. And the reasons for that, because they subsidize inefficient small firms, they protect them from competition, a whole set of reasons. But they're a highly competitive economy that's not very productive. The US, on the opposite, we have much tighter productivity between our traded and non-traded sectors, which is why, by the way, one of the reasons why a lot of US companies, metros score low there. But we've got to do better on raising productivity for our traded sectors. And again, it's also not just productivity, it's innovation. You can be competitive in something that if you just are making something that the other people in the world can't make. I mean, Eli Lilly is a good example of that. They're making drugs that nobody else makes, and they're able to sell those around the world. So I think the key really then is how do you design a system that is focused? I was just talking to a reporter the other day. I won't say what state it was, but they're asking me about some city has just put in place this sort of broad-based tax incentive that just anybody and anything gets it. Reminds me of my old colleague when I was getting my doctorate in Chapel Hill. Ran the state's economic development department, and he said, Rob, our strategy in North Carolina is we shoot anything that flies and we claim anything that falls. And that's not really a strategy. And so I think what you see here, and then certainly in the leading global cities, is a strategy, is a focus. Because if you just spread everything out and just say, well, it's not our job to figure that out, you really aren't going to win. So you have to be able to align where you have natural strengths that from both the private sector and then your quasi-public and public-related resources, universities, community colleges, and others. And they really begin to align that around a whole set of things, which is technology test beds, like your battery effort, your support for R&D and tech transfer, your support for workforce, strategic investments in the right infrastructure where you have that complement, and then also to the extent you do industrial recruitment, which everybody has to do, you focus it on, you're much better off bringing in a firm that's going to be a complement than just some random firm that is in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, I remember talking years ago to a Las Vegas reporter, and he was asking about the state's strategy to bring in call centers. I had no idea why they were doing that. And I said, well, if your strategy is to lower your per capita income, it's a wonderful strategy. Because call centers paid less than the median wage in Nevada. So again, you have to be thoughtful, you have to be strategic.
Yeah. So I want to now hone in a little more on a couple of instances. We've seen the general thrust of some regional strategies. I want David to talk a little bit about a particular initiative, the Indiana Biosciences Research Institute, which I think really not only does it engage with one of Rob's themes of research, but does it at large scale at a metropolitan scale, at the metropolitan level. I mean, this is not historically or theoretically been the province of, say, cities. So can you walk us through a little bit the story of this institute, share the kind of scale and ambition of this thing, and let's talk about that a little bit.
So thanks, Mark. So again, and this is an issue we even need often to explain to people live in Indiana about what the life sciences assets of the state are, because people typically don't think of Indiana as a place that has them. In fact, it's the number 5 or 6 largest life sciences market in terms of number of companies, number of exports, number of jobs, depending on how you count and who's counting, but everybody looks at this stuff. It's certainly within the top 10 in the United States. And that is a fact that we didn't know. It's a fact that Crossroads has spent a lot of time in the last 15 years trying to figure out what to do with that and how to capitalize it and how to have much more of an innovation strategy around it, because it's traditionally been globally traded companies that give us that presence, not startups, not venture capital, not the nimble parts of the 21st century economy. What has happened is that the leaders of our large life sciences companies, interestingly, the other advantage of the sector is it is not concentrated in any one piece. So of the 5 areas that bio describes as being the constituents of life sciences, whether it's pharma, diagnostics, devices, ag tech, we are deep in 4 of them, but we only have 1 globally traded company in each. So unlike in some other regions where you all work, our folks can talk to each other because they are not committing an antitrust violation by getting together and talking about shared challenges and innovation. And it became clear to the leaders of several of our life sciences companies that they had shared interests, particularly around big data and getting sort of the basic analytical tools in place that are expensive for any and all of them to do. They had shared interests around metabolic disease and nutrition, whether it was Diagra Sciences on the nutrition side, or it was Lilly on the diabetes side, Roche on the diagnostics for diabetes side, or even, frankly, Zimmer and Biomet, who in the orthopedics industry focus a lot on the impact of obesity on the human body. There was a lot of interest in that, and there was a lot of ability to believe that if they got together to collaborate, something might happen. The challenge that they had is that all of the life sciences sector, particularly the pharma side of it, is increasingly today trying to get a bigger bench. The scientific issues and challenges are getting harder in any of these areas. You need more smart people looking at it. Right. The smart people that many of our institutions were working with were in universities, but they weren't in universities near us. And so we went to them and said, what would it take? You're spending collectively about $5 to $7 billion a year, probably, in research. What would it take to capture a little bit more of that research spending here as opposed to somewhere else? And the answer was talent. It takes the people we want to work with. We need those people to be here. We need to have them here with us all the time. And so the Biosciences Research Institute is that. It is an intermediary organization sitting between the corporate sponsors and our research universities, Indiana University, Notre Dame, and Purdue University, designed to bring the best and the brightest in areas, selected areas of metabolic disease right now. This could be in other platforms too, but right now it's around that, to locate in Indiana, in Indianapolis, and to set up shop to work more closely with industry sponsors in sponsored research, and to work obviously as an integral part of an academic environment. And that is now, the business model for it requires it to be capitalized at about $350 million, because we are trying to have the Institute have a new business model that essentially allows researchers to operate without any overhead costs. If you are us, again, and you are trying to attract talent like this, to be candid, you have to pay for it, and you have to have an economic model that is so compelling and so attractive that, along with our industry sponsors, people are willing to come to a place like Indianapolis to set up shop.
Yeah. So this is not, a multi-$100-million state initiative, which we have seen those.
Interestingly,
this is at a metropolitan scale.
This is metropolitan scale. Almost all the money in it has come from the corporate investors. It's very unusual for corporate sponsors not only to invest in research, but to invest in capital, and our corporate sector has capitalized this. But the first $25 million came from the state, and that was because our life sciences leaders said, we're doing this, we are an important part of this economy, we want the state to acknowledge and recognize that we are, and so we want your money to be the first in, and we'll do the rest, and that's how it's worked. The challenge then that we had with this is, once you have a talent attraction strategy, and again, that's what this has become, we didn't have a place to put it. And so that has led us into now embarking in yet another ambitious project around creating an innovation district called 16 Tech, for which the Biosciences Research Institute will be the anchor tenant.
One thing leads to another.
It does. Yeah. No good deed goes unpunished.
But so this is a somewhat audacious attempt to change the direction of your region by attracting best-in-world talent and localizing it in a community.
This is as ambitious as it gets, yeah. and we think our industry assets in particular are so strong, and the R&D components of them are so strong, that it gives us the advantage to attract that talent. And again, these industry researchers can collaborate with each other on things like big data, which is really, really important to be able to do that.
Great.
Then we have to be all over it to make sure all the other pieces get put in place.
Great. So in our definition of advanced industries, we define these industries as being intensive in their research activity, but also their skills, and especially STEM skills. I'm very interested in maybe having you, Susan, go deeper on one of your well-known programs, Apprenticeship Carolina, which is an apprenticeship program at a time where many states have begun talking about this. The scale mostly are small demonstration projects of 20 or 30. Colorado has now, standing up a pretty sizable effort. But give us a little sense about this program, its duration, and again, the size and your ambitions for it in terms of, it seems that it's a lot of work to set up any of these programs, so you might as well do it at scale, and you have really tried that.
Go big,
I'd like to hear
go home, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, once again, the actual framework of the South Carolina Technical College system allowed us to build Apprenticeship Carolina very quickly. The actual process itself began in 2008. At that point in time, in the state of South Carolina, we had about 90 companies that were doing apprenticeship and 770 active apprentices. Today, we serve over 809 companies. We have 1,500 separate job titles and 16,552, as of Monday morning, apprentices in the state of South Carolina. The growth has been meteoric. Interestingly, apprenticeship is an old tool, and when the State Chamber of Commerce and the General Assembly asked us to implement that, they also kind of gave us working instructions to make it American, and I say that respectfully, but to also use our existing networks and our reputation for building flexible and customized programs. And so we have a group of 5 consultants that work statewide. They have 2 roles. One of them is to assist companies in designing, putting together the training outlines, the training process for registered apprenticeship. Of course, we work very, very closely with the Office of Apprenticeship and the Department of Labor, great partners for us. But it's also part of their role that has evolved over time to also help our corporate partners figure out how to support financially the training that needs to take place as part of that. There have been 3 interesting things that have emerged as part of this very short-term process. The first is that we've been able to expand the conversation around apprenticeship away from what is maybe traditionally thought of, apprenticeships in the craft areas. But in South Carolina, we look at apprenticeship through the lens of advanced manufacturing, healthcare, information technologies, business and financial services, hospitality and tourism, transportation, distribution, logistics, and energy. So it has allowed us to broaden how we make companies competitive and how we build competitiveness for them. As well, it's had a side effect because it's opened up the industry sectors of helping us attract women and minorities and to upskill those populations which sometimes have some challenges within our state. So that's been one really good takeaway. A second good takeaway from the process has been our ability to build apprenticeship into the economic development process. It's interesting, and it was totally by accident. In 2010, the system underwent a significant reduction in force. And at that point in time, ReadySC, the startup group, and Apprenticeship Carolina were, we like to say, initially pasted together. At first, we couldn't think of what our message was. And then it dawned on us that our ability to, through ReadySC, start up a company, get them up and running, and then to provide continuous skilling to keep those individuals at 100% productivity and globally competitive, that's a really differentiating conversation in terms of economic development. We had a prospect recently who, you know how it is, you're in a room with a prospect and you've been there for days, and you know each other really well, and you're getting down to the brass tacks. And at one point, the one project manager leaned back in his chair and he looked at me and said, "Susan, tell me how you're going to make me competitive 100 years from now." And I thought, I'm just trying to get you through startup. But his was, that's the question. And that's the responsibility, I think, of the technical college system. How do we make a company on the skill set, on the workforce side, competitive, not just for tomorrow, but for 100 years from now? The final thing, and this once again was just by accident, the growth of youth apprenticeship in our state. 2 years ago, we did not do youth apprenticeship at all. One of our German companies that came through the technical college system, through ReadySC, and with adult apprenticeship, came to us and urged us, and I put that into quotation marks, to help him implement a youth apprenticeship program. Today, that's 2 years, 121 companies with youth apprenticeship programs in South Carolina, 215 active youth apprentices. Those young men and women are really amazing individuals. If you're having a bad day, go to the Apprenticeship Carolina website and look at the recent apprenticeship signing day. These are young individuals who have high school diploma, they have half of an associate's degree, they have on-the-job training which provides them with a work resume, and they have money, and most of them a pathway to employment as well as upper levels of higher education. It's been an amazing success story and one that we hope will grow as exponentially as our adult side.
So this is best practice sharing by FDI, right?
Yes,
Foreign
absolutely.
direct investment as vector for...
Absolutely.
Well, let's open this out a bit. I think that the panel is ready to hear responses, suggestions, questions. So I think there are a few microphones moving around. please suggest your affiliation. And
Ellen Meinhardt. I'm with the, I'm an international trade manager with the state of Virginia. And David, I just had a quick question for you. Indianapolis, I was just, as you were talking, you know, it is an affordable, livable city, and I was just wondering if you feel like that plays anything into your success, you know, especially when you're looking at places like Silicon Valley that are getting so unaffordable for families.
It absolutely does. It makes a big difference. It's a very manageable cost of living. I think, you know, recently our friends at JPMorgan Chase are about to have their building renamed the Salesforce Tower instead of the JPMorgan Chase Tower. And one of the reasons I think Salesforce is making a big move there is that it is the cost of living as well as the technology talent they can hire. But I would say this, I think one of the challenges for cities, again, middleweight cities like ours, you can't compete on being cheap. I mean, that cannot be your leading feature that you go out into the world and say, come here where you can buy a house for less and live for less, because the first question you get when you raise that point is, well, why is it cheaper? What are you missing there that we would get somewhere else? So the cost of living, sort of the better sandbox that people can live and work in and be productive in, that has to be put in a context of technology, of innovation, of advancement, of ambition, rather than saying this is a default setting because it's a less expensive place to live. And that is frequently, for particularly our legislators, they want to lead with that argument. It is not a good way to attract talent.
Yeah. Amy. Yeah.
Hi, Amy Liu. I have a question primarily aimed for Rob, but anyone on this panel can answer. You know, there is a national conversation, maybe there's a global conversation about the nature of the stagnant economy, maybe stagnant productivity, at least slow productivity growth, at the same time stagnant incomes. And so there's a lot of tension right now between the growth agenda, the equity agenda, and the solutions. And we see that in some of the debates that we're seeing today. And in conversations I've had recently, there's been a lot of skepticism that an emphasis on productivity will actually benefit workers because of the track record to date. What's your, when we think about a global agenda, a global competitiveness agenda, where a lot of people do think of productivity as the metric for success, how do you, what's your sense now in the environment of whether productivity is the right objective or whether focusing on that can necessarily help a lot more workers?
So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on that one, and a lot of, frankly, poor data that's been sort of repeated over and over again. Piketty's work, you know, all the productivity gains have gone to the wealthy. And it's kind of unfortunate because he's wrong. I think the better and newer data suggests that productivity gains have and still benefit American workers. There's a Federal Reserve Bank study from San Francisco that just came out, and it basically said if you are a full-time worker, you've been able to get wage gains from productivity. It's the part-time and more contingent workers that have had a harder time. Secondly, there's a new CBO data coming out, has just come out that we've analyzed again, says the same thing. Workers have made gains. Now, have they made gains equal to the top 1%? No, they haven't, and that is a real problem. But I think it's a dangerous, dangerous mistake to say the average worker, the median worker, the below median worker isn't gaining from productivity, so we can focus solely on a distribution agenda. And I think that's a huge mistake. Productivity still still helps workers. It's one of those things that's necessary but not sufficient. And so to put all of your eggs in just a distribution basket, I think is going to end up being a short-term solution. You can only redistribute for so long. At some point, you have to stop that because there's not enough to redistribute. You have to be able to grow the pie. We don't have a national productivity agenda. We don't have a national competitiveness agenda. We don't have a national innovation agenda. So other than that, we're doing great. But I think it's interesting. You know, we've had 3 negative quarters of productivity growth. In other words, productivity declined 3 quarters in a row. That's never happened in American history since we started collecting data in 1948. And who's talking about that? Nobody's talking about it. And I think it has to get on the, you didn't hear it in the debate, 0 conversation in the debate on Monday. So that we just issued a big report called Think Like an Enterprise, Why Nations Need National Productivity Strategy. And it goes through that, talks about what are the components of that. So again, cities, I think, also need to be thinking about productivity because one way to think about that, by the way, if you're, one of the reasons I'm assuming Indianapolis might be a cheaper place to do business is that all the companies in Indianapolis that serve the big traded companies, so Eli Lilly and Roche, they all buy legal services, they all buy restaurant food, they all buy houses, they all buy these things. And if those sectors are non-productive or less productive, the cost for these global companies is going to be much higher. So productivity is a complement to being able to be highly productive, not even if the productivity is not in those traded sectors or those traded firms.
Right.
Well, I think that whether or not the federal level is thinking much about it, we've seen 3 regions here that are pretty focused on the competitiveness agenda. I appreciate all of you for enjoying this with me. And I think a fairly inspiring challenge to both think about the right things, but also think about them at scale. So helps us lift our aspirations. So thank you. Please stay put as we're going to move right into our second panel, one that moves from the best of current implementation and practice to exploring the future role of global cities. You'll be in good hands with our moderator, the next moderator, the inimitable Greg Clark. So Greg, why don't you bring your panel up, and thanks all. Thank you.